Every entrepreneur has been there. Growing pains, obstacles make you growth stronger. Gains. It's the challenges that cause us to level up. I'm your host, Alicia Domenico.
How are we still experiencing sexual harassment, violence in the workplace? And I'm always shocked by that and disappointed, I think, in that we maybe haven't come as far as I'd like to think that we have, and that there are just some industries that are really still very far behind.
I think the dream for any gender in the workplace is that we can all coexist within the workplace without challenging each other's roles or questioning the value that each of us can provide. Gender, ideally, will not be part of the conversation in the future. No man wants to feel like he is insignificant now that women are in the workforce and that he is less important. And no woman needs to feel like she can't perform the way that she would want to perform because toxic masculinity is strangling her. How do we meet each other in the middle? And I'm not trying to exclude gender diversity. When you add in new genders and gender diversity, the problem of the original binary between genders just actually gets compounded. So we need to sort this out. But I think if we don't solve for the binary of two genders, we're never going to be able to make the workplace a place for everyone to be their best selves. Because toxic masculinity can probably just compound into toxic femininity in the workplace, and gender diverse people are not able to be their best selves in either of those situations. In this episode, I want to talk about overcoming gender roles in the workplace. And I think that is a little bit of a pointed topic. And I want to really talk about gender roles that are traditional in hopes that we can make the workplace more inclusive for all. That sounds like a lofty goal. You're probably right, it is. But I don't think we get anywhere if we don't talk about these things. When there's growing diversity in the workplace, how do you, a caring professional who wants to always do their best, speak up and make change to make a workplace more inclusive before a workplace culture is negatively effective or becomes a toxic place where no one feels psychologically safe? I don't like the divisiveness. I don't like the conflict between men and women and other genders. I don't like the concept of, well, because he's of this demographic, he's useless to us now. I know mistakes have been made, but guess what? Mistakes are going to continue to be made. None of us are getting it right. And I think we need to think about how we can all do our role as diverse people in the workplaces, whether that's neurodiverse, sexually diverse, racially diverse, ethnically diverse, all of the diversities in the workplace. How are we going to help each other feel like we can be our best in the workplace? Because it doesn't feel toxic to be here. I think the thing about toxicity is that it's really hard to pinpoint in the moment, and you kind of end up doing this awkward laugh that isn't actually in tone with your values and your integrity. So in talking about gender in the workplace, I want to make sure that we're trying to focus on the right, most important things. I don't want to be a bleeding heart. I want to be an equal. I want to actually have a discussion where both sides are listening to each other. That's really hard to do in this day and age. I think that's probably because our egos are always involved, and it's there to protect us and tell us to stand out and to defend ourselves and to not accept responsibility maybe, or to shirk responsibility on somebody else, blame somebody else, play the victim. All of that stuff has to go in order to make real change. We have to think about, what is it that I don't understand yet? What is it that I don't really know how to do well yet? How can I learn more about how to be better? I think if we don't have this discussion, we're not going to create that awareness. We're all going to feel like our words are being ignored. And isn't it really the goal of humanity in terms of our relationships to be understood? Isn't that what everybody wants, is to be understood? So when you're out there getting it wrong and alienating other people, the good human response is to be like, hold on a second, I offended somebody. How do I back up and make sure that I take a new approach and learn something from this, or learn what it is that I don't know yet? I think that's what happened with the whole J.K. Rowling TERF incident. TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, and J.K. Rowling was accused online of being such a person in the sense that she is known as such a strong feminist, but seemed to exclude the rights of trans people in the way that she was writing an essay and trying to defend her position on why she wanted to understand medical conclusions about trans people's rights, essentially. I think what would have been way better is if at the time she realized that she was offending the trans community and all of their allies, that she could have just backed up and said, hang on a second, there's something I don't know here about why you're getting upset, and I need to stop arguing and defending my position and back up, apologize, and figure it out what it is that I don't know yet. So women are just as guilty of this as men are. And I think ego is the enemy, as Ryan Halliday writes in his book. And we need to stop and be like, what is it that I don't know yet, so that I can get this concept of diversity more understood or more internalized by me, so that I can do better by my fellow peers in a workplace. I think it's also hard to check to be like, okay, are we still talking about men versus women? I mean, we've been going on multiple generations here. And the fact is, we need to stop and say, yes, it is still important, because it's still really hard to understand all the psychological issues ingrained in an awkward scenario. And it's way easier to reflect about it afterwards and come up with the language around it, or to be able to articulate why it hurts so much. And then that resentment fosters. And that is a much bigger hill to climb and resolve than being able to A, recognize, B, calmly educate or articulate how that statement made you feel in the moment, to really create a meaningful point to heal and make a relationship stronger, which I think conflict can make a relationship stronger. I don't think that's a widespread concept in society yet, but I think we need to get there. And the more that we subdue our ego and say, hang on a second, we don't know everything yet, we need to do a better job, we need to learn more to understand what it is that we're getting wrong, the better we're going to be at giving that good human response to be like, whoa, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I'm going to listen. I'm going to learn, and I'm going to adjust, and I'm going to apologize. So we're not there yet, and understanding that that can actually be a point of healing change for both parties involved. But being able to recognize what is actually happening in the moment and speak into it is a really, really good starting point, because then you can calmly deliver the message and hope that the other person has done enough self-work and evolved enough that they were able to subdue their ego and listen and help you be understood and be understood themselves. To help us get a better understanding of what discrimination looks like in today's male-dominated workplaces, I invited two other women working in male-dominated fields to share their experiences on this show. Our first guest is Cerise Salanders, the founder and CEO of SolisGuard. Why did you found SolisGuard?
Where I actually began was not really close to SolisGuard at all. It had to do with keeping my dad safe. He was living in a small town out in the middle of nowhere, getting older, his health was starting to go down, and I was looking for ways to keep him safe. And so I had suggested him, hey, what about one of those medical alert devices, the help I've fallen and can't get up. And Dad's like, there's absolutely no way that I'm going to wear one of those things, just the stigma associated with it. And so I started looking into these devices because there's value to them. It's just, how do you get people to want to use them unless, they're essentially on death's door? So I'm looking at these devices and I think, well, there's got to be a better way. So I start brainstorming and I come up with this idea for a panic button that would pair to a phone and it would look good and it would contact your loved ones instead of, a call center and backup call to 911. And that's how I got started, is creating a solution for my dad. And so that was my first company, Aura, or ORA. So it was a B2C company and primarily focused on older adults, although we were selling to real estate agents and even younger people. But it just wasn't working. It was a bit of a grind. What was happening was businesses and government agencies were coming to us and saying, hey, this panic button that you've got, we need something like this because it's a more modern version and can it do all these things? And we started to build on that panic button to create technology around that was good for businesses. And I realized that I couldn't be all things to all people and had to really pick a path. And so I decided to focus on B2B and completely pivoted, rebranded to SolisGuard, and started building out that technology to include satellite, back-end communications, and all these other things to where we're at today. So SolisGuard is an evolution that came from a panic button idea and now is this full end-to-end safety technology for employers who have employees who work alone or in dangerous jobs.
You must have had some knowledge about how to do all this tech stuff.
Absolutely none. Zero, not a zip.
And how did you then jump 2 feet in?
Well, in my previous world, I was an executive at a fairly large credit union. And so I was used to putting together large groups of people doing very big projects, wasn't really intimidated by anything like that. So to me, this was about solving a problem of how to keep people safe and then leveraging technology to do that. And I figured, well, I'll do like I always do, which is hire all these people who are way smarter than me that are experts in their field. So I brought together all of the technical people and said, all right, how do we solve this problem? What do we do? And there's years behind this, but we just kept solving one problem after the other until we eventually got to where we're at today. So I'm a good business person. I'm not a technical person. I'm a business person, but I need to know enough about technology to be able to lead the company.
Let's talk about male-dominated fields now. Are you in one?
Well, am I in one? Technology, which is pretty much all men. I think only 25% of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math are women. I mean, if you look at just developers, 92% of developers are men. Only 15% of tech companies are founded by a woman. So it's super dominated by male. And just entrepreneurship in itself, we still know that men outnumber women 3-1, just pure entrepreneurship, let alone technology fields. Then when you add safety on top of that, which is the field that I'm in, only 19% are women. So it's this kind of trifecta of areas where every single one in and of itself is male dominated. And then you bring those together and you say, okay, I'm a woman who owns a technology business in safety. And then you look at the complexity around that and the challenges in building a business when it comes to raising capital and VC. And what you find is that in all the VC funds that are distributed, only 3% go to women. And of the people writing the checks, only 15% are women. So everything that I do in every aspect of the business that I run, it is male dominated.
And how did you become successful being one of those few women who was able to get VC funding, let's say, or work in the space or become the boss to hire all these men who are probably working for you?
Something that I have noticed, not always, but a common theme in this industry is that the women who get into it at my level, who are the actual founders, the inventors of the companies or the technology, we're almost always hyper focused on the problem that we're trying to solve. So there's a problem, we're going to go out there, we're going to find the tech to solve that particular problem, just like I did. Men do that as well, but more often than not, they're building fantastic technology and then finding the ways for that technology to fit. I'm overgeneralizing, and I hate to do that, but I can tell you of all the female tech founders that I've ever met, it comes from a real life experience that they have to solve a problem. And I'm one of those people, and I think that's why myself and other women founders are successful.
Amazing. Do you think it still matters whether a field is high in numbers in one gender? Does that matter?
It matters when it's not balanced, I would say. Because when a field is not balanced, there's going to be biases, there's going to be stereotypes. And I think lack of diversity means lack of diversity in thought and in innovation and in products and in solutions. A lot of the things that female technology or solutions that female founders bring to the table don't cross the path of men. So how are we going to solve these issues if us women don't come forward?
Are you suggesting that they're solving issues that maybe didn't occur to men to solve, or it wasn't part of their traditional roles? Is that part of it?
I would say some of that for sure. Like we'll see women solving problems specifically as it relates to gender issues. That may be health issues or socioeconomic issues for sure, which is great because men aren't paying attention to it. So absolutely. And I think that's fantastic. But I know women tech founders who are solving issues with water and are solving issues with online scheduling. And that has nothing to do with gender roles or being a woman. It has to do with getting stuff done. So there's a bit of a balance. But of course, I mean, you're probably not going to see many men come forward to talk about technology as it relates to solving, menopause.
Yeah.
They don't experience it.
Yeah. When you were talking earlier about the things that you notice and the ways that you solve a problem as being important to having the diversity in the workplace, that you have a balance of perspective, is there anything that we missed there that we should go back over in terms of like what we've just been discussing now?
Well, I think what we were primarily talking about was founding tech companies, leading companies, that sort of a thing. When you talk about diversity in the workplace, it's a little bit different as it relates to what is needed to run a company. And I think it's diverse thoughts and diverse ideas. And for myself, I benefit greatly the fact that most of my staff are men. So in terms of my diversity for myself, I've got women on my team, but I also have men on my team. And I have young people and I have older people, and I've got families and I've got single people, and I've got people who, have different sexual orientation. Like, I think all of that makes us a richer and more impactful company as a whole.
Right on. Are you still noticing gender roles around work or family? Or other maybe social structures like conversations with friends and neighbors?
Oh, yeah. I think it's culture. It's what we live with every day.
And have there been ones that have maybe helped you build up your career or taken away from it?
I've experienced things where if I'm with a male, automatically people think they're the boss and I'm not. Those sorts of things. Have I been a victim, if you will, of discrimination? Definitely. My personality, though, is that, and I've always been this way, is I'm really a very confident person. And other people's preconceived notions or ideas or biases or whatever generally don't affect me. So I'm really blessed and lucky that way, I would say.
And when, one of the things that I'm really interested in articulating for our future generations is, and I felt this in my career, was things were happening or roles were happening and playing out. And I didn't know at the time to call it what it was. So you as a confident person, were you aware of what was going on as a young person in the workforce? Did you know how to articulate it, or did you not know how to articulate it?
Yeah, I was, but some of it is situational. I remember when I was younger, I was the youngest vice president in the history of the organization that I worked for, and the CEO at the time and I had a very different cultural perspectives. He saw the world very differently than I did, and his coaching of me was something that just didn't resonate. And despite my confidence in myself, it was hard to speak or even articulate that I was uncomfortable, that sort of thing. I also have been blessed to have a partner in my life who, he's a true partner. And he's always been there as somebody who I could talk to and, commiserate, if you will. So fortunately for me, we've got a very healthy, balanced relationship. And so regardless of what was happening with work or what was happening with any individual person or circumstance, I can go home and be with somebody who, I have a very healthy relationship.
I love that you're focusing on balance and you're talking about perspective being able to shift, but also to share the load in terms of that balance. I think that's a really important takeaway when we talk about gender roles. Do you think that how it is now is how it's always going to be this way, or do you foresee further changes in terms of male-dominated workplaces versus female?
I've been in business for a while now, and there is absolutely change. And change is coming at different paces and in different places. And I think that we're absolutely going to continue to see a shift and an evolution. Certainly there'll be people who will put up roadblocks or want it to go back to what they consider to be the old ways, but I don't think you can stop evolution. I think gender roles aren't static. they're evolving. And, we see that in all sorts of ways. I know for myself, and maybe I've just been paying closer attention to it, but I'm seeing a lot more senior leaders, CEOs that are women, for instance, in very public, very large organizations. And we are seeing more women coming into non-traditional workplaces, whether that's the trades or STEM or whatever the case may be. So is it happening as fast as we'd like it? That's a different story, but I think it's coming.
Do you feel in terms of the pace, do you feel like an impatience for things to hurry up and get there?
I think for me, sometimes I'm just always shocked by when crap happens. I'm like, really? This still goes on in this day and age? How are we still experiencing sexual harassment, for instance, or anything with respect to violence in the workplace? And I'm always shocked by that and disappointed, I think, in that we maybe haven't come as far as I like to think that we have, and that there are just some industries that are really still very far behind.
But working in the tech sector as a female, you have felt like you can own your place, you can be successful, and you can have the support of men in your life to help you be successful in this field.
I really do, despite the fact there's so few of us. And maybe it's where I am in Saskatchewan and whatnot, but I don't think so, because I've had the pleasure and the benefit of talking to tech founders across the country. I think this is a really safe space for women in terms of finding great people to work for and with you, being taken seriously as a leader in your space. Because when you look again, I go back to the beginning, we're solving real problems with technology. And the litmus test is, are people buying your product and are you creating a business? So as we start to do this and become more and more successful, I think there's the credibility and the validity that we need.
And ultimately, what unites you is that desire to solve the problem together and to use technology to do it. So you have that shared common goal as a group, as a workplace, no matter what else is different between you.
For sure. And I also find that the men in tech are really, for the most part, I mean, generalizing again, but for the most part, men that are in this field are really open to working with women, because a lot of them want to be a part of something important. They want to build real cool stuff, and they want to have careers. And just because it may be led by a woman or they're working with women, I don't really see a lot of bias, which is great. And maybe it's because it's a pretty young field too.
Is there anything we should have covered today that we didn't?
I was just looking at my notes here, and there was a question on, do you think we're giving too much time to discussion in gender socially or at work? And I was thinking about that. And I think with respect to women in particular, that we haven't even scratched the surface. An area that we have yet to even open the discussion on is bias against women with respect to ageism and age discrimination. It seems like men can age gracefully. Their stock goes up, if you will, the older that they get. They take on those senior executive and CEO roles later and later in life. I feel as though women kind of hit a best before date, and then it's like, okay, are you retiring yet? Are you a grandma? Or these sorts of things. And it's very disparaging and discouraging. And I think that in our culture, people don't notice that bias, that they're doing it. Considering that we have such an aging workplace and our population is aging, I think this is an issue that's only going to grow. So there's that aspect of it. There's the talk of menopause. There's the talk of all of these things that they're not even brought to light at all. So we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I agree with you. Ageism, I've been loving a lot of the stuff that's been coming out on other podcasts where people are actually tackling menopause and talking about it and saying, like, I remember when I was a kid and my mom was going through it, we called it the big M because it was like this word you never wanted to say.
No,
right?
Shame, and embarrassment.
It is. It's like, it's this thing that we don't want to talk about. And I haven't even begun to unpack all the voices around it. that we culturally feel. But I do think that you're right. There is going to be a lot of very articulate people coming forwards with a voice about how we can rethink our perspectives there.
Absolutely. As women should be celebrated as they age, and they should be celebrated in the workplace, not essentially put out to pasture. And that's something that absolutely needs to change. And us as women, young women, you're obviously younger than me, but us as young women need to start talking about it now.
Well, and I'm 42, and I actually feel like I'm coming into my wisdom. I feel like I have I've been a boss we've been running this company for 12 years, but I know so much more now. I am so much better at it. Don't you feel that way? Like when you learn and you're like, my wisdom should be celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. And maybe that's the place, maybe like women being girl bosses, that's the thing. Like that also will allow so much of this conversation to unravel because, of course, nobody can hold you back except for yourself at that point in time. So being in a position of leadership is ultimately one of the best ways, and things that we need to encourage young women to do is to say, well, be your own boss, because then you're going to set the tone.
Doing a great job in the workplace can certainly be hard enough as it is, in terms of managing personalities and just doing a job at the skill you're supposed to be doing it at. But adding in a layer of feelings can feel like an extra to a lot of people still. So let's talk about why feelings and understanding where that empathy of where other people are coming from and making them feel welcome to contribute, why that's still so important. Even if we're not getting it right all the time, why it's still a good goal to pursue. I wanted to invite Brandy Hewson, the founder and CEO of Y Products, on the show to talk about why it's still important to make the effort and how to do a better job than maybe we're doing right now. Unfortunately, her audio got corrupted, but she had a ton of amazing things to say, so I'm going to relay them here along with my own thoughts. Let's start with an argument of mine. I think that the majority of social change actually happens at work with people because you're working with people that you respect on a skill level where you're all collaborating. When you respect them at that level, it's so much easier to hear them. And unfortunately, I would say it's easier to hear the people you work with and respect, sometimes maybe even more so than your own partner. As shameful as that may be, I think there is a sort of level of respect from the level of a lack of intimacy between you, and that professional barrier requires you to listen maybe better than you sometimes do at home. So it's easier to maybe hear what they're saying, and it's easier maybe to learn how to change your behavior from somebody that you work with in the workplace when they say it to you, rather than somebody in your social life. Brandy got into the line of work that she's in now, this landscaping field, because she has a family history in the trade. So early in her life, she worked a summer job in plumbing before discovering that marketing and entrepreneurship were her jam and starting her own company, Y Products. So I wanted to talk with Brandy about how she became successful in a male-dominated field. She was pretty vulnerable in her interview. She talked about the need to always be able to immediately demonstrate and have to prove her knowledge in this space constantly. Is that an extra? Is that something that the men in this space also have to do? She talked about that too. So for example, at trade shows, the majority of those trade shows are dominated by men. And I think that there's a bit of an industry problem right now across most trade shows that they are typically more filled with men than a lot of women, because I think most women are expected to be at home and take care of their children. Still, yes, at this point in time that you're listening right now, I think we're still suffering for that and suffering from assumed roles in family life. And I'm not alone, because Brandy echoed me on this. I think Brandy even mentioned an example where she's been working in this field, and trade shows of like pretty women on posters were enough to sell a product. I think you probably also know about trade shows where some of the after hours activities that go on are not necessarily always respectful to women too. And yes, that's still happening at the point in time we are listening now. And I'm not going to call it any bad actors or make any judgments, because I think what we really need to do is just be able to listen and hear why that might be making other people in your field uncomfortable and what you can do about it. That's the goal. No wall of shame required or highlighting what people are doing that is wrong any further than I already have. So these trade shows, which are also largely taken up in space by men more so than women, because a lot of women are expected to be at home and take care of their children. Brandy talked about that in her experience in her male-dominated field. I'm going to give some amazing examples of ways that I think we can create social change around this just by being a little bit more attentive. I'm a gay woman married to another woman, and we have children. So we're constantly in dialogue about this and talking about who's taking care of the kids rather than assuming a role. And I think a lot of other couples could really benefit by sharing the role of parenting and who's taking care of the child instead of assuming the roles of parenting, which I hear a lot of people in my life complaining about, that they're the default parent without any conversation around it. And certainly there has been lots of topics in other podcasts that have covered female burnout and what's driving that. Brandy talked about it in terms of her marriage, that they have split the roles and they've had this conversation. And so, yes, she goes to trade shows. But that's not even just structurally what's happening at home in her house. She's got it figured out. It's the reaction she's getting from other people that socially and professionally, I think, need to change. When Brandy's at the booth of a trade show, as opposed to many other males, she almost always has to answer why she got into that field first, rather than actually just talking about her work, because most of the men she talks to simply can't wrap their head around the fact that she wants to work in this field. So she felt like in her 20s, she had to be defensive about it, but now she's picking her battles and able to answer the question more empathetically and to help educate the person who's asking that question. So I think this is a process of social change for most people. But if you're the one who's asking those questions, maybe being a bit more sensitive and knowing that maybe I shouldn't ask that question is one way that you can help create social change. It's a little bit like assuming that somebody who has an accent isn't also Canadian or part of your culture. Don't ask that question anymore of where you're from. We all know that, right? So someone like Brandy shouldn't have to prove that she has a right to be there, that she's just there like everybody else there in that field, and she has a ton to contribute, as we can see from the growth of Y products. There's also a lot of jostling for this, I think, power politics that are running beneath most of the scenes. So she'll be at the booth and she may have let's say a young man working with her at the booth, and he'll be her junior, right? And she's actually the badass girl boss, right? And other people will go to the man and assume he has all the answers and wait in line rather than just talking to her, because they'll assume she's a female in the booth and will not know what she's talking about. Imagine their shock and surprise when the junior defers to her, but that is actually the norm in that field. And if Brandy doesn't have to answer what she's doing in this field, oftentimes she immediately has to show her level of knowledge at the technical level right away to prove herself. Whereas other men in her field don't have that same pressure to speak at a certain level and jump right into the technicalities. And every year I feel like I have to admit this to at least one person, but I never grew up feeling like a feminist. Yes, I, Alicia Domenico, did not realize I was a feminist because I just assumed equality. And I think I got away with that most of my youth, let's say. I think youth kind of covered that there was always, maybe you don't know just because you're young. But now that youth isn't an excuse, I've started to notice that there is still a need to be a feminist. But I've always, as part of that journey, actually also been a defender of men. And I want to talk about the toxicity that is assumed of men, that because they're a male in a trade space, they must know something. They must be able to swing a hammer, right? Like that old joke is a family joke in my family, that if you're a male, you must be able to swing a hammer, whereas most of the males in my family don't. In fact, it's the women who do. And I think that actually is a gender role that's toxic for men too. So I think let's all give ourselves permission to escape to the freedom of just because you're a man doesn't mean that you have to actually be good at all trades. So be mindful of your body language. I think Brandy is tired of facing the men with shock who are wondering, what could you possibly know, when she's the one who started the damn company. Brandy has always had to show off her knowledge in a way that the men who work for her do not. And if we've missed that, I'd love for the male listeners of this episode to let us know if you ever feel like you've had to be defensive about your knowledge, or that there's something amiss in what I've told you so far. The next part I want to talk about is the why it's so hard to speak up piece of this episode. Brandy was saying that when someone's being rude to her, intentionally or not, she finds it hard to correct them without being perceived as biting back. I think the three women who were on this show, including myself, would ascertain that women are so much more focused, or told to be focused, on how we'll be perceived and to worry about it, more so than men ever are. Am I right about that? I'd love to know your comments. As for the female listeners, do you think you're the kind of woman who supports and is an other ally for other women? Because I think that's something we need to think about too. There's a lot of vicious type women who have had to compete with other females all their lives, socially, professionally, or otherwise. And because of that, you're constantly trying to prove that you're the best woman around. If there's only going to be one spot, it needs to be yours. And that means that you're doing it at the neck of another woman. And again, I don't think we need to have a lot of judgment around this. I think what has happened, but it's more about who do we want to be when we grow up and into the future, and who do we want to role model for the other people in our lives. And I will say that I think this power politic of defensiveness, and if there's one spot, it's going to be mine, and I'm going to drive home and be the best at the cost of my other colleagues around me, that is something that your company can culturally control too. Culture will rise up if you don't set it. And setting a culture of cooperation rather than competition is in you to establish. One of the things that we always talk about at Tangible Words is that we want to help each other. And the way that we help each other is to accept blame and just move on. You don't need to decide whose fault it was, but help each other look good and be like, yeah, that's on me. Let's look. The most important thing is not the blame and what happened, which I think in a culture of competition is what happens by default. But what we're trying to do is actually say, yeah, I don't care about the blame. Let's just talk about how we're going to fix it now that we're here. But I do think the more that we're all sensitive to what other people's experiences are, the better we'll ultimately all be. And the more inclusive we'll certainly be in order to take advantage of some of those diverse perspectives can certainly offer to have a more comprehensive experience, more innovation, more ability to plan for failure and to be better at it next time. And I think educating and helping each other be allies and to support that culture of collaboration is a really worthwhile conversation for companies to be having instead of allowing that me versus you mentality to fester within an organization, which I think it does if we don't have those conversations. Let's go back to the social piece again, because here's something else that Brandy experienced as the CEO traveling around to trade shows in a male-dominated field. People were constantly asking her who is taking care of her kids while she's traveling. And she'll say, well, my husband. And they'll say, oh, well, he's a good man for letting her travel. Wow, think about that. This is what I mean about the toxicity of relationship and assuming roles. Wouldn't it be better for a couple to decide on roles, even to share the load towards these mutual goals of a parent being around to help our child, rather than to assume there's always someone who's going to be doing that extra around the house? And I know if you're listening, you probably already feel that way, and we all want this. But the point here of them saying, oh, he's a good man for letting you travel, not only makes us feel still like property, but then they also get all empathetic about how it must be so hard on the kids that she's not there. And I think, whoa, is this really what we want to say, people? Because don't we also want to acknowledge the good men who are great parents in our lives? Saying that the kids are suffering because there's not a female parent at home, I think is incredibly disparaging of men. Brandy additionally brought up that no one is asking men these same kinds of questions. They're not lamenting who's taking care of your child or your wife is such a good woman for letting you travel. That would be ludicrous, right? So why are we doing it to Brandy? And I just think there are a lot of really great male parents and they don't want to feel like an extra. But if we're not paying attention to the things we're saying and the questions that we're asking in a professional or social environment, we could be doing more harm than good. And I don't want to call it out in judgment, even if that's all you hear right now. I really want to call it out in the sense of where do we want our culture to be in the next 5 years? And now a little bit more humility. Brandy and I are both moms of boys, and we're trying to raise our boys to think about how they can help and how they can grow to become the kinds of parents that we want to see in the world. But there's still a bit of something that can feel a bit like guilt as to who's providing the food and who is taking care of them that I think we have to actually own as well as female parents or even as parents now of boys. And I think I can say for myself, I'm not always sure that I'm forcing my boys to do work around the house like I probably would have expected of a girl. So full humility here. I think it's something we have to look at within ourselves. In the world of homophobia, we talk about different types of homophobia, and we talk about like internal institutional homophobia. These are all things that we see, right? And I think that's the same with this level of feminism or whatever we're calling this concept that I'm advocating for, which is equality in the workplace, including in male-dominated fields. So I suspect we need to have all those levels of interpersonal honesty, relationship honesty about equality, and professional as well as when you're doing these social activities like trade shows, but in a professional context. So I'm going to put my hand up and say, I don't know that I'm challenging my boys. I don't know that I'm challenging children. I mean, it's a very different era in terms of the empathy that we give our children and how much more we want to protect childhood and allow it to be this fun time of wonder, play-based learning, all of these things that we're told are better for kids and that responsibility will come later. But are we doing that? I don't know. Time will tell, I guess. I'm just asking the questions for now so that I can keep it top of mind and be looking for opportunities to extend my growth as well as my children's. But I do feel that as a girl in my generation, and something that a lot of women I've heard talk about had the same experience, that we're expected to help out. So we're demanded of that. And I think a lot of boys get let off the hook about chores and family life. So if you're a parent of boys or you're coaching boys in the workplace, I think we should really expect them to do the thing that we're expecting of women, and maybe even just call out ourselves to be like, to ask the question, are we doing that? Are we being equal in requests as well as travel arrangements? So I'm a huge proponent of how social change happens in the workplace, but of course it also happens in families. So I asked Brandy if she thought we were always going to be this way, or if she's seen change over the course of her extensive career. Brandy said we have a long way to go. She was listening to an Oprah podcast where the famous feminist Gloria Steinem was on, and Oprah asked her if she was pleased with how far women had come, and Gloria said she's furious about how far we still have to go. Brandy's seen some progress. I feel like I have too. But she started in the days where companies could just use like attractive women in their booths. Now women aren't props at trade shows anymore. So that's progress. Instead, they're women like Brandy who have a ton of knowledge to share about her industry. I'm just saying, look for it. Don't be surprised when it happens. And, maybe we'll never feel like we've come far enough. Maybe we'll never feel like we're all getting it right all the time. I'm not really sure that's the goal. I don't think we can expect perfection. We're looking for success and we're looking to grow on the areas that deserve growth. I think stopping and listening, the fact that you even made it this far in the podcast, says something about you and your commitment to do better and to make change. The more we listen and think about the things that we're saying, the conversations we are or are not having, we will, in terms of roles, and whether in the family or workplace roles, I think the closer we're going to get towards empathy and sharing the load and the set of expectations around how work should get done in the workplace, as well as in our lives socially and our social structures like family.
Find more episodes of the Company Growth Podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you've got a company growth story you'd like to share, reach out to Tangible Words. We'd love to hear your story and use it to inspire others to beat their own company growing pains. Until next time, thank you for listening to the Company Growth Podcast.